Hello, I'm Penny Thornton and I'm talking astrology. On this video, I'm going to use as my center point the new moon in Libra on the 6th of October 2021. But of course, I'm going to be looking at all those other influences that are around at the time, which of course turn it from a kind of bland new moon into something, on this occasion, really rather exciting. So let me start, first of all, by looking at the sign of Libra. The moon in Libra is always considered to be a rather nice placing for the moon. The emotions are well balanced. It's a very sociable moon. It's a very personable moon, kind, considerate, all of those kind of things. And so we can say in a way that when the new moon is in Libra, all these kind of people-pleasing things are available to all of us to a greater or lesser extent. But we also need to think of Libra and what it represents in terms of law, of justice, of fair play, of balance in all things. Libra has a lot to do with the arts, especially music and dance. And it also has to do with relationships and love, of course. So we can think of these things generally in terms, as I've just mentioned. And we can think around this time, we might be listening to news or getting information or sharing ideas that are revolving around those kind of themes. Of course, Libra is in our chart somewhere, whether it's in the 8th house or the 2nd house or wherever it may be. So that's going to be an area of specific interest for us with this new moon. But just in general terms, this is a new moon which brings a lot of the unexpected with it. And I'm going to show you why I mean that shortly. The interesting thing is that on the day of the new moon, Pluto, the planet of transformation and elimination, turns direct. Now, it's been stationary for a little while. And so the previous kind of 7 to 10 days, and obviously 7 to 10 days after the new moon as well, you might find that there are an awful lot of earth moving developments. Now, I don't necessarily mean things like earthquakes or volcanoes. I mean that the things, the pillars of justice, for instance, are changing. All sorts of things we are now looking at that mean that things are not the same as they used to be. And perhaps there is this process going on of getting rid of what we don't need, overriding things in the past, and actually having to come up with some very new systems and some very new ways of looking at it, whatever it may be. Now, the other thing that I want to do, and I'm going to show you the chart now, because I think that might make it just a little bit more easy to see. If we look at the chart, you'll see that the sun and the moon, the new moon, is right up at the midheaven point in the chart. That's where that vertical line is. Because this is set for London and the new moon happens at midday in London, round about that time. And you'll see that the sun and the moon aren't alone. Mars is with them. So there is, in fact, what we call a triple conjunction. Mars, the moon, and the sun all together. Now, that's pretty powerful. And we think about Pluto going stationary direct at the same time. And then look at those two red lines that I've drawn to Uranus in the 5th house, which is about 4 o'clock, in terms of the clock face of our chart. That's an angle of tension. So it means this is a fairly explosive period of the year, whether we're looking at politics, whether we're looking at nation and nation, whether we're looking at controversies of one sort or another. It's going to be really kind of radical and unusual and perhaps a degree unsettling. Now, in fact, Uranus and this new moon are part of a series of new moons that have connected with planet Uranus. The first one really to be that close was in August. Then we've got, obviously, last September, we have a beautiful trine to that Uranus factor. And now, as we come to this month, we've got an inconjunct, 150 degrees. And by the time we get to November the 4th, where we've got a new moon in Scorpio, it will be right opposite that Uranus. So we've gone through a huge amount of Uranus change this year. And of course, Uranus is squared by Saturn. And so a lot of that change has come in. And there's been a lot of resistance to it, a lot of struggle, and all of us one way or another, have felt that we have really had a lot of strife in our lives, and it's gone on and on and on. It hasn't, just been a problem and it's gone away, and then it's just been relentless. I'm going to come back and talk a little bit more about that in reference to Chiron shortly. But I want to have a look again. Let's go back to our triple conjunction there, the new moon conjunct Mars. That area of the horoscope, 13 degrees of Libra, is the fixed star Algorab. Now, this is not the best of fixed stars either. It is of the nature of Mars and Saturn. And certainly in older times, and we can go right back to the Babylonians, and we can go to the Romans and up through the Middle Ages and to the 16th and 17th century. Mars was the lesser malefic, and Saturn was the greater malefic. And if you put those two planets together, you've got a lot of trouble. So this is not a particularly favorable fixed star. And here we have a new moon conjunct Mars itself in conjunct Uranus. So we've got a right royal setup here, which is going to be prickly, to say the least. What I would say in general terms, everybody out there, is that on the 6th, which is a Wednesday, this is not the day to take a risk. If you're traveling and you're in a car, don't be tempted to put your foot down on the accelerator or roar through a red light. You will pay a penalty. So the same thing really with what you say and how you say it. Think before you speak, think before you take an action. Because although I don't think the planets make us do anything, there is a sense that they are witnesses to what we do. We are somehow linked to them, and that the idea of being fearless at this point in time is folly and not a good idea for any of us, regardless of what our sign of the zodiac may be. Now, the other thing about Mars, we bring it up to date. We're no longer living in the 17th century, so we don't have to worry about all the malefic side of Mars. In modern terms and more psychological terms, Mars is about action and drive and energy. And we need Mars in our lives, because without it, we wouldn't go forth. We wouldn't make waves. We wouldn't do anything pioneering or any of those things. So Mars is a force for the good. It just has to be used carefully, and it has to be used pretty carefully around the time of this new moon. Now, if we look at the chart again here, and we move towards Mercury, which is the blue planet next door to Mars, we can see it says it's 20 degrees of Libra, and that's sort of angling the planet Pluto there, which is at the 8 o'clock position of the horoscope. Now, this is a Mercury-Pluto square. Now, the interesting thing is that this is happening 3 times during the course of the next kind of 6 weeks. So it's quite interesting. The first time it happened was on the 22nd of September. So think back to that time. Was there anything earth-shattering about that time? Did you make a very, very serious decision? Did a lot of things sort of rumble and roll at that time? Because Mercury, of course, turns retrograde on the 27th, and therefore, a couple of days later, on the 1st of October, Mercury squares Pluto again. So back we come to the same decision-making process, the same event, and we get a chance to review it. And you may be able to trace this with certain situations that are going on in the world as well. Finally, Mercury will square Pluto after it's completed its retrograde cycle and gone forward on the 2nd of November. So in point of fact, we've got the whole of this period between one new moon and the other, where there's going to be a lot of digging and delving, powerful thinking, powerful changes going on. It's that kind of period. So I also want to look at where I've drawn in Chiron. Now, Chiron is the opposite point to the sun, the moon, and Mars. It's not exact. It's not 13 degrees of Aries. It's about 10 degrees of Aries. So we're not an exact opposition here, but it's significant. And the reason I think it is significant is this, well, first of all, we have to remember that Chiron isn't a planet. Chiron is a centaur object. It's considered to have a bearing on astrology because it crosses into our solar system. It crosses the orbit of Saturn and then comes into the sphere of Uranus. So it's considered to be a Saturn-Uranus object. It is of the nature of Saturn and Uranus. And what do we have this year but a Saturn-Uranus square? So it is significant when Chiron makes a connection to a new moon or a full moon, because it brings out the message that Chiron is bringing with it during the times we are living in. Now, Chiron is a journey. It's not a thing. So that when we look at Chiron in our own natal charts, we're looking at our journey through life, and it's a journey towards healing, but it often represents an area of our life where we just can't fix it. We just can't get it right. We can get it right for everyone else, but not for us. And it takes a lifetime to really experience this and not necessarily rise above it, but learn to live with it. And in a way, we can look at Chiron and think about maybe it is learning to live with the difficulties that are posed, certainly at this time, by the Saturn-Uranus square, whether it's to do with the ever ongoing effects of the coronavirus or a whole heap of other things to do with politics in various countries. But what I also wanted to look at here was the idea that we've got the new moon and Mars in an air sign, Libra. So an air is all about concepts and ideas, and let's talk it through. Let's discuss this rationally. Let's distance ourselves from this. Whereas Aries, where Chiron is all about heat, the now. Let's do it. Let's go forward. Let's be pioneering. But we've got these messages mixed because, of course, we've got Mars up there in Libra as well. And I reduce this down to a single kind of idea, the idea about fire power, the power of fire. Now we've seen, Chiron has been in Aries for a long period, but it has certainly this year, we've seen an enormous amount of forest fires across the world. So we've seen the devastation that happens with too much fire. And we've also seen the devastation that happens when we use firepower indiscriminately and destructively, quite literally with guns. And that's an ongoing theme, really, particularly in America, where there's a big, group who would rather see some limitations on guns, whereas perhaps the majority of people in America feel it's the right of every citizen to own a gun. So you've got firepower in that way as well. But I think firepower is also, for us individually, the way we give voice to, or we put actions, we put ideas into action. Fire as a function is intuitive, is creative, and all the fire signs are creative and pioneering, really, in some regard, one way or the other. So we've got this message going with Chiron, which is about learning and healing and learning, how to manage it, learning how to manage firepower. And I think that message is coming really long and loud at the time of the new moon, or indeed in this new moon cycle, which really stretches first and foremost, until the full moon later on in October, and certainly the next new moon, which is on the 4th of November. So just thinking about the idea of how we use firepower is really important. That's one of the messages, if you like, that this new moon has to give us. Now, I also wanted to look at the idea that Pluto turns stationary direct on the day of the new moon. And that, together with the setup with the new moon, is really incredibly powerful. And probably even up to a week before, we've probably got some pretty earth-moving developments, earth shifting, the tectonic plates of situations shifting. But what we also find as we go through this new moon cycle towards the full moon, we get a lot of planets, in fact, turning direct. We've got Saturn turning direct, 11th of October. We've got Jupiter and Mercury turning direct on the 18th of October. And I think if we put all these things together, all these planets that have been on a retrograde roll for months in some cases, now moving forward again, it's almost as though a lot of the things that have been under wraps, that haven't been very obvious, that have been taking place in dark corners, seemingly going nowhere, are about to gather momentum. And we're going to see this with lots of situations in the world, that now things are moving. And I think just sort of briefly a little bit about Prince Andrew has had this lawsuit hanging over him and not really wanting to make comments on it at all. And we see all these planetary maneuvers going on, forcefully becoming, direct. I think that push is definitely coming to shove, and we're going to see some pretty big explosive kind of developments through this new moon period. Now, I did also mention the idea of algorab, which is the nature of Mars and Saturn. But I also wanted to look at the constructive side of Mars and Saturn. When you put Mars and Saturn together and you consciously relate to them, then you have persistence in the face of adversity. You get to finish something. You get to keep on going till you've done it. You get strength. You get resilience. You get order. You get structure. You even get a kind of protection. So we can't just say, because we've looked at this complex setup with this stellium in Libra in conjunct Uranus, Pluto going stationary, direct, Mercury squaring Pluto, all these things that are really quite difficult, quite challenging. There isn't a good side to all of this, when there definitely is. And it sort of brings me right round to a point that I want to make. You know how I like to end with a sort of idea that both the times make us think about these things, but it's also part of what I go through with my clients, because, I see clients all the time. So they tell me their stories, what they're going through. And so I do get this enormously wide picture of people who are really, really struggling with relentlessly difficult situations. They could have handled one of them, but now they're handling 2 and 3. And there doesn't seem to be a way to resolve them. And back we come to the Saturn-Uranus square, the nature of Saturn and Uranus, which is, that frustration and restriction and release once one has owned it and dealt with it. I've talked about this a lot. So the little kind of phrase that I wanted to come to, and that we could think about and maybe pop on our desks or our fridges or wherever we put thoughts that we want to remind ourselves of. And that is, we need to convert our pain into power. And that's also very appropriate really for Chiron as well, because that's what we need to do. We can't necessarily eliminate the pain, or we can't necessarily eliminate what's causing the pain. What we can do is turn it into power. We can be empowered by it. And I think that's a really important message, because I think all of us, when we're faced with very difficult circumstances, we do feel sorry for ourselves. I mean, we're human. Of course, we're going to feel sorry for ourselves. And we want someone to fix it. We want astrologers to tell us it's all going to be all right in a day or two. It's all going to be just fine, because that's human nature. But the healthier option is to really convert that pain we're all suffering and be empowered by it and say, you know what, I'm going to take this. I'm going to make changes. I'm going to do what I can. I'm going to be ennobled by the pain that I'm going through. I'm going to see it as something that marks me in a good way. And I don't care what the adversity is. I'm going to let it empower me. So that's really fighting talk. I actually, when I think about that whole setup with the new moon conjunct Mars, Mercury square Pluto, the in conjunction to Uranus, the idea that you're going to convert your pain into power is a very, very strong message indeed. And in fact, that's where I'd like to leave you on. Take care, and I'll speak to you in another couple of weeks. Bye for now.